Okay, now we've been teased with the ghost before in Act 1, Scene 1. In Act 1, Scene 4, there have already been two scenes by this point where the ghost appears and floats around and is very frightening and great cause for concern, but does not say anything. So round about this time, an audience that hasn't seen the play before, Shakespeare's original audience, might have been wondering, whether this ghost was ever going to talk. Thinking maybe this is the kind of ghost that doesn't talk. There have been, in fact, most ghosts in Shakespeare plays don't talk. They just sort of show up and point at you and freak you out. The ghosts in Richard III talk, the ghosts that appear to Richard to psych him out on the eve of the Battle of Bosworth Field with all of that despair and die stuff speak. But then again, those are heavily implied to all be a dream. Shakespeare has made sure we know, having given us two scenes so far, 1.1 and 1.4, where multiple characters all see the ghost at once and agree with each other about what they are seeing. It's as though he wanted to, before the ghost tells us anything, make sure, okay, just so we're all on the same page here, in this play, the ghost is real. Everybody get it? This time the ghost is real? Okay, good. Now the ghost can talk. And when he finally does, aside from his initial mark me, pay attention to me, the first thing that the ghost establishes is that he is not having a very good time in the afterlife. My hour is almost come when I to sulphurous and tormenting flames must render up myself. He continues, I am thy father's spirit, doomed for a certain term to walk the night, and for the day confined to fast in fires, till the foul crimes done in my days of nature are burnt and purged away. But that I am forbid to tell the secrets of my prison house. Oh, so there's the rules of the afterlife again, just like we heard about in the previous scene with when the devil is or isn't allowed to bring you to hell. But that I am forbid to tell the secrets of my prison house. I could a tale unfold whose lightest word would harrow up thy soul, freeze thy young blood, make thy two eyes like stars start from their spheres, thy knotted and combined locks apart, and each particular hair to stand and end like quills upon the fearful porpentine. But this eternal blazon must not be to ears of flesh and blood. So, in addition to learning what they called porcupines 421 years ago, we learned that if Hamlet's father, if the ghost of Hamlet's father were allowed to tell us what it's like for him in the afterlife, it would the tale would scare us to death, drive us insane with fear. So luckily for us, he's not allowed to tell us. Now we are wondering at this point why. Since Hamlet's dad, we've been hearing for 4 acts now, was the greatest guy ever. Hearing this not just from Hamlet himself, but remember, before we even meet Prince Hamlet, back in 1.1, in the long speech that introduces the subplot of the beef between Denmark and Norway, Horatio says, our valiant Hamlet, for so this side of the known world esteemed him. So we hear other characters, even when Prince Hamlet is not around, other characters back up Hamlet's idea that his dad was like the greatest guy ever. So it's not just Hamlet himself being biased. So one thing we're wondering here is, wait a minute, if this guy was so terrific, why is he apparently in hell? More on that in a couple of pages. First up, the business of revenging his foul and most unnatural murder, as the ghost requests his son, the prince, do in line 25. Hamlet responds, haste me to know it, that I with wings as swift as meditation or the thoughts of love may sweep to my revenge. Now, based on the fact that there is still a whole lot of play left, we might be suspecting that Hamlet does not get around to this revenging quite as swiftly as he initially swears he is going to do. Indeed, he does not, and the reasons why he does not will be consuming most of our attention for the ensuing 4 acts. We also learn in line 36 that "'tis given out that sleeping in my orchard a serpent stung me." Apparently, the official story was that Hamlet Sr. died of snake bite. Given that there are no poisonous snakes in Denmark, I don't know, why this story fooled so many people, but apparently it did. He then finally confirms in lines 38 and 39 that "the serpent that did sting thy father's life now wears his crown." In other words, he was killed by his brother Claudius, Hamlet's uncle, who is now king. Even if we have not seen the play before, or we're not familiar with the original Scandinavian legend on which Shakespeare based the play, we probably already had our suspicions. And it seems that Hamlet himself had his suspicions. "Oh, my prophetic soul, my uncle," he exclaims in lines 40 and 41. In other words, I knew it was him. I knew it all along. "I, that incestuous, that adulterate beast," the ghost continues, backing up Hamlet's idea, his factually incorrect idea that the relationship between Claudius and Gertrude is incest. We heard Hamlet say in Act 1, Scene 2, "almost wicked speed to post with such dexterity to incestuous sheets, it is not nor it cannot come to good," when he's excoriating his mom in his first major soliloquy, the "to solid flesh" speech back in 1.2. Now, both Hamlet and the ghost are factually wrong. We already brought up in the video for 1.2 the idea that not only is marrying your dead brother's wife not incest, but according to some obscure part of the Bible, it's even something that you have to do, depending on your interpretation. Shakespeare's original audience would have been, at least to some degree, aware of it. So even more interestingly, though, is what the ghost says next. "That adulterate beast with witchcraft of his wits, with traitorous gifts, oh wicked wit and gifts, that have the power so to seduce one to his shameful lust, the will of my most seeming virtuous queen." So there's that concept of seeming again. We heard Prince Hamlet philosophize upon seeming at length in his first speech of more than one line. Back in 1.2, "Seems, madam, nay, it is, I know not seems. 'Tis not alone my inky cloak, good mother," etc. These indeed seem for their actions that a man might play. So we're returning here to the very central thematic territory of appearances versus reality, things or people seeming one way on the outside and secretly being something else inside. Various characters may be doing this. We heard in a more humorous tack Polonius's advice to his son Laertes in 1.3 about, the way to get ahead in life, the way to behave at college is by, seeming one way on the outside, regardless of what you actually are on the inside. This was perhaps a buffoonish hypocrisy, but more of the kind that we can eye roll at or chuckle at than something that is actually evil. Now we're getting into the zone of things that are actually evil. Claudius has, if the ghost can be trusted, killed his own brother in his sleep, smiled in everyone's face, and got with his dead brother's wife. So this would be a straight up evil permutation of seeming to be one way on the outside while secretly being something else on the inside. Now, of course, we had, and I suppose still have, the question of whether this also applies to the ghost. Is this really Hamlet's dad's ghost, or is it, as the other characters, as Horatio and Marcellus suspected at 1.4, what if it just looks like your dad on the outside, but it's really the devil or something? So far, Hamlet seems convinced, but then again, the ghost is telling Hamlet what he already suspected. right? Oh, my prophetic soul, my uncle. This is something Hamlet was inclined to believe, already half believed anyway. But in addition to this seeming virtuous queen bit, we've got, it seems like a small thing. For some reason, I'm obsessed with it. The ghost attributes Claudius's seduction of Gertrude to witchcraft of his wits, traitorous gifts, wicked wit and gifts that have the power so to seduce. Gifts, okay, anybody can do that. Wit, it is true that women like funny guys, but I've read this whole play several times, and I never heard Claudius say anything funny. He's just about the only character in the whole play who never says anything funny. I mean, even Gertrude, who everyone else barely lets talk, says a couple of funny things. If Claudius is secretly funny enough to bag chicks with his wit, he certainly never does it when he's on stage. So is this now this raises a larger question that is not so minor. Is it possible for the ghost to be wrong? When the ghost says that it's wicked wit and gifts that had the power so to seduce, is this objective truth? Is this a fact just because the ghost says it? Presumably this would have been, even when he was alive, would have been going on behind his back rather than in front of him for him to observe. Has he been given knowledge about what happened in death that he did not possess in life? As far as his own murder, well, he was present for that, obviously, but the wit and gifts would have been done when he wasn't looking. So is this a guess? Is this a wild guess or an assumption on the ghost's part, or does being dead give you knowledge of things that you did not personally witness in life? In short, is it possible for the ghost to be wrong? Anyway, since the ghost scents the morning air, he gets to his point. Sleeping within mine orchard, my custom always of the afternoon, upon my secure hour thy uncle stole with juice of cursed Hebena in a vial, and in the porches of mine ears did pour the leprous distilment, whose effect holds such an enmity with blood of man that swift as quicksilver it courses through the natural gates and alleys of the body, and with a sudden vigor it doth posset and curd like eager droppings into milk, the thin and wholesome blood. So did it mine, and a most instant terror barked about, most lazar-like with vile and loathsome crust all my smooth body. So a few things to notice here. One is that the long and gross description of what this death was like. Ear poison, not a method of murder you hear about every day. This was apparently a terrible way to die. This stuff, the ghost says, with a sudden vigor doth posset and curd like eager droppings into milk, the thin and wholesome blood. Eager meaning acidic. So if you ever, like in middle school science class, poured some kind of acid into whole milk and watched what happens, it's pretty gross. Imagining that happening to your blood. And as a result, a most instant terror barking about with vile and loathsome crust all your smooth body. In other words, it goes like people's secrets do. It now occurs to me, from the inside to the outside, right? At first is just on the inside, then is visible on the outside, with this vile and loathsome crust. This must have been a extremely painful, disgusting, horrifying way to die. So one thing that this does philosophically is remind us that, king or not, the human body is the human body, right? And even if you are a medieval king with a big fancy crown and absolute power, you would be in just as much unspeakable agony dying this way as farmer or peasant or anybody else would be. In some ways, people are very different from each other. based on station in life. In other ways, the human body is the human body, pain is pain, and we have sympathy for anybody who dies in such a terrible way, regardless of how privileged he was in life. Another thing we notice that might a modern audience might need it pointed out to them, but would have been immediately apparent to Shakespeare's audience, is that Claudius has killed his brother. Not only did he kill his brother in his sleep, which is bad enough, but he did it with poison. Now, this was, in terms of stereotypes of the time, this was not a manly way to kill, right? Certainly in the Renaissance, with figures, like Lucretia Borgia and whoever, the stereotype, and even in ancient Rome, with figures like Locusta and Agrippina, right? The stereotype was that women killed with poison, right? The figures of these women with the rings that secretly opened up and had these powders in them, different kinds of poison. It was the stereotypically female way of committing murder. So remembering that Claudius was the guy who used the word unmanly back in 1.2, said that, 'tis unmanly grief, right? Told Hamlet that he was acting like a woman by still being sad past the prescribed period of mourning in this illogical way. Now, this shows us that Shakespeare knew, just as so many of us know today, that it's the guys who are the most obsessed with enforcing gender roles in others, letting other guys know what is or isn't manly, who secretly have issues with their own masculinity. So we now see that Claudius is one of those guys. He's lecturing everybody else about how unmanly their emotions are, but secretly he's so unmanly himself that he's killing dudes in their sleep with poison, instead of, as the saying goes, fighting like a man. Now, coming back to this question of why the ghost is in hell or in purgatory or some place with sulphurous and tormenting flames. Thus was I sleeping by a brother's hand, of life, of crown, of queen, at once dispatched, cut off even in the blossoms of my sin, unhouselled, disappointed, unannealed, no reckoning made, but sent to my account with all my imperfections on my head. O horrible, most horrible. In other words, as if being murdered this way, with weird-ass, blood-curdling ear poison by my brother in my sleep wasn't bad enough. It had been a while since I prayed, cut off even in the blossoms of my sin, unhouselled, disappointed, unannealed, no reckoning made. It had been a while since I made confession, or I didn't have a chance to receive the last rites. So that means all of my recent sins were on my conscience, and thus my time in hell is longer. In the Renaissance, and certainly in the Middle Ages, it was believed that pretty much everybody, unless you were a straight up saint, was going to have to spend some time in hell. But how much time you had to spend there depended on how recently you had chatted with a priest and received absolution. Now, it may have been a little different. The rules might have been the afterlife rules might have been a little different in Protestant Elizabethan England in Shakespeare's time when he's writing the play, but the play is still set back when everybody in Europe is still Catholic. So the idea, the sacrament of confession is important here, right? That was the idea. You confess your sins to a priest. I've done this and that, and the priest says, say 117 Hail Marys, and you say them, and then even if you walk right outside and immediately get hit by a bus, you'll go straight to heaven because your sins were forgiven. That was why in battle, before everybody went into battle, they had a priest come around and take everyone's confession and bless everybody and have them say their Hail Marys and their Our Fathers or whatever, because then if they died in battle, they'd go straight to heaven, or almost straight to heaven, because they'd chatted with the priest recently. Hamlet Sr. was a busy guy, busy with king stuff, hadn't had a chance to do that in a while. So that's why he's being tormented by these sulfurous flames for as long as he is. Now, this may seem like, okay, a bit of medieval and Renaissance religious trivia, but as with so much in these early portions of the play, file it away. Remember that the ghost said that because this idea that how much time you have to spend in hell depends on how recently you have prayed is going to become important later on. Now, before vanishing with the dawn into the trapdoor on the stage, the ghost's final words: howsoever thou pursuest this act, taint not thy mind, nor let thy soul contrive against thy mother aught. Leave her to heaven and to those thorns that in her bosom lodge to prick and sting her. Fare thee well, adieu, remember me. Ghost vanishes. An excuse for some Elizabethan special effects there. Probably the ghost is at that point positioned over the trapdoor in the stage. Someone opens it up, and the ghost whoosh disappears into the trapdoor on the stage. Some guys down there with bellows, blowing smoke up through it. So probably visually some sort of neat trickery accompanied that. Hopefully with some very soft cushions down there to catch Shakespeare himself, who we know played the ghost. So the role of the ghost played by William Shakespeare himself. Now, if I were Hamlet, what I would be saying in that moment, as my dad's ghost is disappearing with the dawn into the trapdoor, right after this, howsoever thou pursues this act, taint not thy mind, nor let thy soul contrive against thy mother aught. Leave her to heaven and to those thorns that in her bosom lodge to prick and sting her. In other words, oh yeah, my brother, that Claudius guy, yeah, kill him immediately, but don't do anything to your mom. Let God and her own guilt deal with your mother, the queen. Leave her to heaven and to those thorns that in her bosom lodge. Now, what I'd be saying, if I were Hamlet in that moment, is, okay, wait, hang on. What exactly did mom do? Was she in on it, or? But no response, and Hamlet doesn't even try. It's unclear what exactly we're supposed to think Gertrude did, if anything. Hamlet's subsequent speech, the moving all you host of heaven" soliloquy, "Remember thee," he exclaims, "I, thou poor ghost, whilst memory holds a seat in this distracted globe." Now here's one of the many lines of Hamlet's that kind of seem designed to make the audience go, huh? Sort of remind us that we're watching a play. As everyone knows, the Globe was the name of Shakespeare's theater. So when Hamlet talks about holding a seat in the globe, here in context, he means, his brain, while memory holds a seat in this distracted globe, the distracted globe of his head, of the human mind. But obviously, if you use the figure of speech, holding a seat in the globe, the audience goes, oh, hey, that's us. We're holding seats in the globe right now, watching this play. So right at a moment that is supposed to be very dramatic and moving, and where you would think a playwright would most want the audience to be utterly lost in suspension of disbelief, in forgetting that it's just a play, and feeling sympathy for this actor pretending to be Hamlet, the Prince of Denmark, reading lines written for him by the guy who just dropped into a trapdoor 5 seconds ago, right at the moment when you would think the playwright that Shakespeare would most want us to be lost in our suspension of disbelief, he reminds us that it's a play with this double meaning pun about holding a seat in the globe. So it's as if knowledge that it's a play, on the part of the audience, continual reminders and confronting the fact that it's a play is part of how the play is going about being a play. Um, Remember thee, yea, from the table of my memory I'll wipe away all trivial fond records, all saws of books, all forms, all pressures past that youth and observation copied there, and thy commandment all alone shall live within the book and volume of my brain unmixed with baser matter. Now Hamlet is, as Gertrude will eventually point out that the player queen is doing, protesting too much. Hamlet is trying so hard to sell, how hard he's going to accomplish this revenging here. He's going to do so much revenging. We're going to get tired of revenging. You won't even believe it. He's saying it so much that we're beginning to doubt. He's, as the kids say today, doing too much. As though he's trying to convince himself, meaning his own doubts about whether he's really up to the task here are already beginning to creep in. In another, I suppose, contrast between what's on the outside and what's on the inside. Right? Someone can say something, but they can say it in a way that makes us suspect that they don't mean it. And then look what he does here in line 105. Yes, by heaven, O most pernicious woman, O villain, villain, smiling, damned villain, my tables meet it is I set it down that one may smile and be a villain. At least I'm sure it may be so in Denmark. Now, I love that line. My tables meet it as I set it down that one may smile and be a villain. In other words, oh, where's my notebook from school? I should write it down that it's possible for someone to smile in your face and secretly be evil. They never taught us that in school, but it seems important. So this is another line that speaks to, or that backs up another one, I think, of the running themes from the play, the contrast between knowledge in the sense of education, what they teach you in school, and knowledge in the sense of being equipped for real life and what real life might expect from us, sometimes very suddenly, as is happening to Prince Hamlet right now. We already saw this introduced back in 1.1 with Horatio, right? Hamlet's best friend from college, the other very educated character in the play, entering in 1.1, very, very sure that there's no such thing as ghosts. Tush, tush, 'twill not appear. And then, to his great amazement, turning out to be wrong. So Hamlet's "my tables meet it as I set it down, that one may smile and be a villain," backs up, like his friend Horatio a few scenes ago, realizing that we learned a whole lot in school, but it didn't always prepare us for real life. But before that, look at lines 105 and 106. O most pernicious woman, O villain, villain, smiling, damned villain. He exclaims most pernicious woman before he exclaims smiling, damned villain. He's madder, it seems, at his mom than at the guy who actually did the murder, even though there's zero evidence that his mom actually did anything. We had that very vague taint not thy mind, nor let thy soul contrive against thy mother aught leave her to heaven, from the ghost right before he disappeared. But how are we supposed to take that? I mean, was Gertrude in on the murder? Heck, was the whole thing her idea? Was she having an affair with Claudius for some amount of time beforehand and put him up to the murder? Or even if she didn't know about the murder beforehand, was she what we would in today's language call an accessory after the fact? She didn't plan about it or know about it beforehand, but she was told about it afterwards and knows about it now. Or I mean, she might have been having an affair with Claudius, but not know anything about any murder. Or she might be completely innocent of all of it. And there is a equally logically compelling, positive way to see Gertrude's motivations here. Like Hamlet himself, we might initially jump towards this conclusion of, oh, well, if she didn't have something going on with Claudius beforehand, why'd she marry him so quickly? At the very least, she's selfish and just likes being queen so much and getting to wear fancy stuff and sit on the throne that she dishonors her husband by immediately marrying this other guy. But there is a totally logically compelling, unselfish motivation for Gertrude, right? She could, her beloved husband dies. She turns around and his brother has the crown on. Her son, Hamlet Jr., is away at college. She could be thinking, well, my son was supposed to become king. He didn't. My husband's brother became king. If he's not married, if he takes a wife and has a child now, that child will be next in line for the throne, and my beloved son Hamlet will be out of the line of succession. But it seems like Claudius has always had a little crush on me. I've seen him checking me out a few times. If I cozy up to him and he marries me, I'm not going to have any more kids, and next in line for the throne will still be Hamlet Jr. So she could have it may be a stretch, but it makes as much sense as anything else. She might not even love Claudius and have done it all for Hamlet's sake. Or the whole thing could have been her idea and she put Claudius up to the murder. We don't know. So at this point, the central, at this point or any point, the central question of the whole play is, to paraphrase a famous political expression from the 1970s, what did the queen know and when did she know it? Gertrude could be either the worst or the best character in the whole play, morally speaking. We simply don't know. Hamlet jumps to the conclusion that it's all her fault, exclaiming, "Most pernicious woman," before he even gets around to saying anything about the actual murderer, the actual smiling damned villain. Anyway, at that moment, the other guys catch up to him, Horatio and Marcellus. Hamlet, I guess, is unsure how much he wants to tell them, and is putting them off with, hello, ho, boy, nonsense for a while. The first actual full sentence he speaks to them is a tautology. There's never a villain dwelling in all Denmark, but he's an arrant knave, in lines 120 through 124, which in modern language means something like, every asshole is also a douchebag. Horatio, dryly and wittily, and now there's some wit for you, responds, "There needs no ghost, my lord, come from the grave to tell us this." In other words, we already knew that assholes were douchebags and villains were knaves. A ghost wouldn't have had to bother coming all the way back to Denmark from the afterlife to inform us of this. See, I told you everybody but Claudius says something funny. Hamlet puts them off for another couple of speeches, but does specify at around line 138, touching this vision here, it is an honest ghost. That, let me tell you, for your desire to know what is between us, or master it as you may. In other words, I'm not going to tell you what the ghost said, but that was definitely my dad's ghost. I don't want to hear any more about maybe it was the devil disguised as my dad or any of that stuff. I know my father, that was him. It is an honest ghost. That, let me tell you, that was really my dad. Case closed, at least for now. He then makes them swear, compels them to swear, never make known what you have seen tonight. They say, fine, that's not good enough for Hamlet. He encourages them to swear upon his sword. And that's when the ghost gets to scare not just the other characters, but also the audience. The actor playing the ghost, who remember was William Shakespeare himself, has been underneath the stage this whole time, and was handed a megaphone or whatever, and gets to start bellowing, "Swear, swear by his sword," banging on the stage, probably with other guys under there with billows, making smoke pour up through the cracks. Look at what Hamlet has to say about this in line 151. "Art thou there, true penny? Come on, you hear this fellow in the cellarage, consent to swear." The cellarage. I mean, they're supposed to be, out in the forest. Now, Hamlet means, this guy in the ground, this guy down there, and, we could see someone referring to hell or purgatory as, the basement, or traditionally it is believed to be down in the bowels of the earth. But Hamlet is using the actual word for, the empty space underneath a stage, right? Where a trapdoor in a stage would lead to. So just like his bit about holding a seat in the globe from a couple of pages ago, he's once again using a term that reminds us that these are actors on a stage and that we're in a theater watching a play. Uses another word seemingly designed to snap us out of our suspension of disbelief. It is necessary, according to Hamlet, that they swear by his sword, and never to speak of this. Now, this how long this goes on here. This swear by my sword, swear is something that students joke about when they read the play in school. But this is a place where the difference between reading it on the page and what you'd be looking at visually is important. The symbol of the sword, both as a symbol of Hamlet's duty in life, it presumably was once his father's sword, would have been handed down to him from his father, just as his own name was, because they're Hamlet Senior and Hamlet Junior. But also here it functions as a visual symbol of the central moral paradox of the play, right? When people swear by a sword, they turn it upside down and all grab the hilt. Well, when you turn a sword upside down, now what does it look like? Now it looks like a cross, right? This way it's a sword, this way it's a cross. Now it's a sword, now it's a cross. So this idea of this central question about the morality of revenge is symbolized by, right, this way it is a symbol of violence, this way it's a symbol of Christianity, of passivity, of Jesus, of turning the other cheek, of not getting revenge. All right, because that's a big thing in Christianity. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. I get revenge, you don't. But then again, honoring thy father is also a big thing in Christianity. Hamlet has been ordered to get revenge by his dad, who's a ghost. Does that mean the ghost has God's permission to come back here from the afterlife and tell him this, or did the ghost act on his own? Hamlet is very concerned with the rules of the afterlife. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. Jesus says, turn the other cheek. But I'm also supposed to do what my dad says. If my dad's ghost says, get revenge, did he have permission from the afterlife to come back here and tell me that? And so that makes it okay. It's unclear. Now, the religious paradox goes beyond the morality of revenge, right? Anybody, whether we're a prince or not, can worry about whether revenge is a moral act according to our religious beliefs or to some other philosophy. But the fact that Hamlet is a prince and that his ghost dad is a king, and that the guy he's supposed to kill is also a king, but is the wrong king, that's a religious issue too. Remember, king, especially in the Middle Ages, was not just a political position, it was a religious position. The king was God's anointed. Killing a king, regicide, would have been seen not just as treason, but also as a very grave religious crime. Even well beyond the normal extent to which any old murder is a sin. Denmark is, to come back to that famous line from the very end of the previous scene about something being rotten in the state of Denmark, the fact that the wrong guy is on the throne means that Denmark is existing in a state of sin, of immorality, of religious unbalance. That was the whole theory behind absolute monarchy and the divine right of kings. The idea that God was going to see to it that the right person was on the throne, and it was through him that God's justice would be administered on earth. If the guy on the throne is secretly this terrible guy who has committed this very biblical evil act of a brother's murder, killing his own brother, then this is not just a political problem Hamlet has to fix as the prince. It is also a religious problem he has to fix as being the sole possessor of the truth, the sole possessor of what the ghost had to say. Only one person who has been on the other side, or been in the afterlife, and come back here to tell us about it. It appears in this play, the ghost, and Hamlet's the only one who's heard him talk. And then, of course, finally, they're also a father and son. So Hamlet has a trinity, if you will, of responsibilities here to commit this revenge, and acting as from a political perspective as a prince, from a filial perspective as the son of a murdered father, and also from a religious perspective as the sole possessor of a divine truth. Probably they taught him all about how to act when you're one of those at the University of Wittenberg. We talked a lot back in 1.2 about how it is no coincidence that Shakespeare tells us that this is where Hamlet went to school. Horatio is suitably amazed by all of this. "Oh, day and night, but this is wondrous strange," he exclaims at line 164. Hamlet responds, "And therefore, as a stranger, give it welcome." What a great line. It's another religious insight. And I think one of the truths from the play that many people could most do with being reminded of today. Scripture tells us to be hospitable, right, to welcome strangers. All those scenes in Scripture where when a stranger shows up at your door, you give them something to eat and wash their feet and anoint them with whatever it is. All that hospitality stuff. You're supposed to welcome strangers, take them in. Hamlet points out that, well, if that goes for strange people, right? If God wants us to be hospitable and welcoming to strange new people, shouldn't we also be hospitable and welcoming to strange new ideas? So he responds to Horatio's "Oh, day and night, but this is wondrous strange" with "and therefore as a stranger give it welcome." In other words, take in and be nice to this strange new information, this strange new idea, right? There is such a thing as ghosts after all, just as you would with a strange new person. Shouldn't Christian hospitality extend to strange ideas as well as to strange people? Hearing Hamlet speak this line, we're reminded of how, I suppose, ironic it is that throughout the ages, today or then or whenever, it has often been, I'm sorry to say, people who consider themselves to be very, very religious who are often the least welcoming to new ways of thinking about things or new ideas that they consider strange and unfamiliar. more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. Hamlet continues in another line about how their fancy educations at Wittenberg were, it seems, both philosophy majors. It did not prepare them for this. They're still not done swearing. Hamlet adds some more conditions to the vow. Here, as before, never, so help you mercy, how strange or odd some'er I bear myself, as I perchance hereafter shall think me to put an antic disposition on, that you at such time seeing me never shall, with arms encumbered thus, or this head shake, or by pronouncing of some doubtful phrase, as, well, we know, or we couldn't if we would, or if we list to speak, or there be an if they might, or such ambiguous giving out to note that you know aught of me, this do swear. He specifies that he hereafter shall think meet to put an antic disposition on. Now, this is another aspect of the story that Shakespeare inherited from the old legend of Prince Amleth, whose father, Horvendil, is killed by his brother Fengan, who then marries the queen Gerutha. Aside from the usurping brother and the dad's ghost and the remarrying mom and the revenging prince, one of the other aspects of the old legend was that the prince feigns madness, right? Pretends to be crazy, so that no one, so that the uncle won't suspect that he knows too much or won't consider him a threat. This seems to be a commonplace in epic tales of vengeance from all over the globe, quite independently. In the Japanese story of the 47 Ronin, you had their leader, made a great show of publicly pretending to be a drunkard, so that the spies of their enemy who had slain their master would not consider him to be a threat. So if you've got revenging to do, throw people off the scent of your revenging by pretending to be drunk or pretending to be crazy or whatever. This is something the audience is expecting, right? If Hamlet doesn't pretend to be crazy, then it's not really a story about Hamlet. It's something you have to put in. Just like if you're making a movie about Robin Hood, there has to be a scene where he makes an unbelievable shot with a bow and arrow. If that's not there, it ain't really a Robin Hood movie. There had been stories and plays about Hamlet before, and if the prince don't feign madness, it ain't a play about Hamlet. Shakespeare knows he has to put that in, but it's one of the aspects of the inherited legend that he uses to mess with us. In Act 2, in the next act, we'll see the early stages of this antic disposition of Hamlet's, and it will very quickly make us wonder, wait a minute, is he just pretending to be crazy, or is he actually starting to lose his mind here? It'll be a little unclear. They can't tell anyone they've seen the ghost. They can't tell anyone that Hamlet's going to pretend to be crazy. And not only can't they tell anyone, they also can't do any of that, ooh, we've got a secret, but we can't tell you what it is stuff, but pronouncing of some doubtful phrase as if we list to speak, or such ambiguous giving out. So Hamlet really is covering all his bases in the contract of the swearing on the sword. And after one final swear beneath the stage from the ghost, things calm down. Let us go in together. Still your fingers on your lips, I pray. And with these two concluding rhyming lines: the time is out of joint, O cursed spite, that ever I was born to set it right. Now, we should be, I feel, comparing these to Hamlet's rhyming couplet that concludes Act 1, Scene 2. Right? Back then it was, foul deeds will rise, though all the earth o'erwhelm them to men's eyes. Right? If someone has done something bad, they're going to get found out and they're going to get punished. right? But there's no I in there. You know, this is something that Hamlet believes will happen on its own. You know, God will do it. You know, similar to Horatio's "Heaven will direct it" from the end of 1.4. But now that's been updated to the time is out of joint, O cursed spite, that ever I was born to set it right. So, you know, it's going to get fixed, but I can't just sit around and expect God to do it. I've got to do it myself. And as far as how to do it, for that, we'll need to wait for Hamlet's lines that conclude Act 2, Scene 2. But before that, Act 2, Scene 1, which we'll deal with next time.